Thanks a lot. I hope everyone can hear me. There you go. So I know it's coming towards the end of the day, and I've heard there's been some additional talk today about text analytics and kind of sentiment analysis a little bit earlier today. I didn't see those, so I'm hoping I'm not going to repeat some of the things that you heard earlier. But I want to start off with just something really quickly. How many people are using social data currently for insights work? Currently, so okay, that's quite a few. How many people are happy with the data quality and trust the data quality as an input into that model? I know he's not serious about that because I know Todd, but yes, thank you. But all right, so let me tell you a little bit about something going on. Converseon, we've been doing this for 15 years. I can't believe it. We've been in the social space for all that time. I won't really go into the details of it except for the fact that we not only do social research, we actually provision social data, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is. And we've been doing it long enough to be able to talk a little bit about what kind of like this dirty secret of social data. And so what's happened in the market is, and this even goes back, pre-social data really is, folks have tried to kind of create rules and program human language. And it doesn't work really well. Human language is really, really complicated. Linguists, we still don't understand how children acquire syntax, right? And so what happens is, in most cases, where you're pulling that social listening data is through social listening platforms. And they're using, in most cases, and I can talk about different flavors of how they do that, but they're using what we call kind of a rules-based methodology to help determine things like sentiment, right? So they take dictionaries of words, essentially positive words, negative words, and they'll look at the proximity of how that is towards your brand, and it'll make a judgment based this is positive or negative, et cetera, right? Based on kind of what it's seeing. But the world is much more complicated than that. So if I say to you guys, I spent my entire lunch hour yesterday trying to exchange my ticket for American Airlines, there's no word in that sentence, right, that's negative, but you know it's negative. If I say to you, I use a product to help my baby sleep at night, doesn't really, really be defined as trust, but it's about an expression of trust towards your brand, like a brand attribute, right? So language is really, really complicated. So what's happened in these rules-based approaches, there are three things you really have to think about if you're going to input this data into research and insights. Because there's a divergence going on in the marketplace between social listening, which is basically saying, here's kind of what's happening in the moment, and social insights and research, which is trying to find the whys and the deep meaning within this incredible resource we have, which is these expressions of opinion that are happening on a global basis. And it's massive, right? And it's happening all the time in larger form. So anyhow, CMU did a study that said basically they looked at this stuff and they basically said, this social media data shouldn't be used for research purposes because it's not trustworthy. But on the other hand, they pointed to in the same article that there are solutions to making it trustworthy and usable and reliable, and it's around machine learning and statistics and other things that I'm going to talk a little bit about. So this is really this next generation of social listening. One of the problems is this is a rules-based solution. Anybody who's had to build Boolean queries, right, knows the pain of this. This is extremely complicated to this word close to this word, and I exclude this word because I can have this word. You put the wrong word in, you're gonna get all kinds of stuff in your data set that you don't want. Imagine your Apple computer, right? And you're gonna have all kinds of fruit in your data set. I mean, and you try to exclude things, but then you miss things that are really important to miss. So when you're thinking about the evaluation of social data, let's think about the three things. There's precision, which is how closely can the algorithms match the gold standard of human performance. Now, humans don't agree on everything. Humans agree maybe 80% of the time, and in some categories like politics, maybe even less. But 80% of the time, a human will look at a record and say, yeah, this means this, and so what you have to do, the gold standard is really three independent humans. And if the three humans don't agree, you have to have an adjudication process. So let's say that's the gold standard. So you want to be able to match that human precision. Now, in some cases, we're able to actually exceed human performance, but that's a whole different matter, and it's a different topic. So precision on the rules-based approaches, and this has been written about widely, are about 60% precision. They get it right a little bit over average. It's almost a coin flip, but a little bit better, right? Then you have relevancy. So how relevant is this data set that I'm actually evaluating? Well, using these Boolean queries, you're about 15 to 30% relevant. And that is pretty consistent across different categories. And the more challenging your brand is, if your brand sounds like things are using words that are used in common phrases, then you're in bigger trouble than that. But there's another problem. There is, for example, there's two parts to this. Words mean different meanings in different domains. And the rules-based approaches have often treat everything the same. So, the word, small is good for selling smartphones, it's bad for selling hotel rooms. There's some examples here. One of our largest clients is a big software company, and the word disruptive seemed to be negative all the time, but actually in the technology sector, disruptive is kind of a positive, right? So language has to adapt to your particular brand and your particular category. But there's another issue on top of this, and that is kind of this concept of target level sentiment. All conversation, all opinions online come from a certain point of view. If I say, I love Coca-Cola, is it positive or negative? Well, it depends if I'm Coca-Cola or if I'm Pepsi. And so infusing a point of view within these systems is essential for you to understand really how the opinions are reflected from your point of view and not just kind of a general point of view. So these have been some serious problems. So what you really come up with is you have 60% precision, you have 15% relevancy in your data set, and you have another problem, which is low recall. And recall means essentially this. If I give you a bunch of data, how many signals are you pulling out of the data set, right? Because many people will say on a sentence level or on a paragraph level, well, this is kind of mixed sentiment, or I can't capture every expression of opinion that happens within the statement. So what you need to make sure is that you're getting as many signals out of the data as possible, what we call entity or facet level analysis, so that you're getting a bunch of signals so that you can understand not just, I'll give you an example. There was a lot of negativity that was being expressed at one point towards Taylor Swift, and some folks were like, how is that possible, right? Because they were only looking at kind of record level sentiment towards the artist, but when they did entity level analysis, they found that the expression of negativity was towards pulling her music off of Spotify. So you can't get to root cause analysis unless you're getting to entity level analysis to understand the real drivers of these opinions. So this is kind of where we are. This has been the state of the market. And so that's been, as you can imagine, it's pretty problematic to model that kind of data. But anyhow, there is a new era. I'm going to simply just talk about our approach, which is called Convey. There's a booth here. I don't want to talk too much detail about this specific product, but I will say that the solutions are using a different technique. So if, for example, we move away from a keyword-based approach, because so much of human opinion is you can't capture from keywords, it's implicit, et cetera. How do you actually do something that our lead data scientist says that if these algorithms are too complicated, if human language is too complicated to be able to kind of program them in a traditional sense, what we have to do is we have to lend them our brains and scale human intelligence. And that's essentially the only way that you can get to this level of kind of analysis. So these approaches use machine learning, and machine learning, we use machine learning and statistical analysis and some rules-based, but that's kind of getting into the weeds. You kind of triangulate an approach to be able to get to better outcomes. But essentially what you do is, if the algorithms can see enough examples of things that you mean, for example, I gave you an experience of, we just built for a large CPG company, we're actually using this data to start to replace traditional brand tracking. People don't say, I trust this brand or distrust this brand, or I think there's value in this brand. They express it in all kinds of different ways. An example, again, I use it for my baby sleeps. That's an expression of trust. Or it's like, I'm out of here. That's an expression of distrust. So there's all kinds of ways that this stuff can be phrased. So the way that these systems work is they have large training corpuses of large human-coded data. And we've been around for 15 years, so we have a lot of human-coded data. And it picks up patterns like this. But most importantly, because language is always changing, there's a confidence score associated with each of the records, so that high confidence records you can look at, low confidence records that the algorithms aren't quite sure can be kicked out to 3 independent humans who then feed the system. It's an active learning model, right? And if you think about, there's 1,000 words added each day to the Urban Dictionary, slang and sarcasm, all these other things are emerging all the time. You have to continue to train systems in a particular domain. So In text analytics, there's often been the conversations as well, is this a supervised or an unsupervised approach? Supervised is you're looking at everything. Unsupervised is, I'm letting, I have a pretty dashboard and it's just telling me things and that's what I'm reporting on. We actually are advocating for something called a semi-supervised model, which again keeps those humans in the loop, but only for seeing the stuff that's really important so it can continue to learn and scale over time. But you don't want to just stay at semi-supervision. You also want to make sure that that the language is customizable to pharmaceutical, to CPG, to financial services, et cetera. And instead of just being in this kind of sentiment range, because we always talk about sentiment, there are new ways to be able to break the data out that is much more meaningful. You can create more variables in the data sets than you've ever had before around what we call custom classifiers. So one of the custom classifiers is emotion. So we happen to use Plutchik's wheel of emotion. There's 8 different emotions and there's levels of intensity associated with it. So there's disgust and distraction and apprehension and acceptance. And so if you can have 3 independent humans look at that and say, yeah, this is a representative of kind of disgust, and you show the algorithms enough examples of that, which we've done, then the machine can pick up, without people saying, I'm disgusted at this brand, they can pick up expressions of distrust and be able to classify the data that way. So now you're out of just doing sentiment, and you're actually getting into emotions, and you can start to do all kinds of interesting things around this. So for example, there's no Booleans used when you're using machine learning, so we moved away from that. In this particular case, we were simply showing, can you isolate spam the food from spam the broader conversation, instead of using Boolean queries, and the best Boolean query could get to 15%. Within an hour of using this type of methodology, which you're simply just telling the algorithm, yeah, this is relevant, this isn't, it got to 85% relevancy within an hour. So no more Booleans. You can see an example over here. If you use, we took the term Cool Whip because Cool Whip is a term that Cool's used in a lot of places, and so is Whip, believe it or not, in social media, in all kinds of forms. So you get all kinds of stuff back that's irrelevant. If you look at the left, what happens is you're seeing kind of very low precision using rules-based approaches, sentiment and relevancy at 38 and 46%. And you see all that neutral? It's because you're not pulling the entity-level signals out of the data sets. You're not getting a lot of signals out of the data, so it simply classifies it as kind of like neutral or mixed. You put it through these new techniques and you can see all the signals are coming back and you can see the level of precision and relevancy in the data set around it. But it's not enough that you now have emotion and sentiment, because there are now also expressions of intensity. How strongly do I feel about something, right? It's not that I just like or dislike something. And here's an example here is like, with each of these records, there is an intensity score associated with it. And we found that intensity scores or actually correlate very strongly with some type of action, whether it's purchase, whether it's advocacy, whether it's something negative as well. So understanding this level is important. So now you can do all kinds of cool things. You can say, I want to isolate expressions of, around these different emotions with a level of intensity, and kind of understand really what's happening at a much more deeper level of meaning with the product. And here you're pulling all the signals out of a data set at this entity level, so you're really understanding all the drivers of what's going on and outputting it into formats through APIs and other things. That can also, by the way, which is another big movement in this space, is finally unifying social data with other voice of customer data. So call center data, transcripts, verbatims and surveys, et cetera, so that you're really seeing this unification of the voice of the customer through these types of technologies. And then on top of this, you can essentially build any type of machine learning-based custom classifier that you can kind of think of if the litmus test is 3 independent humans would agree to it. So you just have to give it enough records, right? So you can build things like advocacy. And people, again, it's like, I don't advocate for this product. They express advocacy in all kinds of different ways. Or purchase intent, or whatever it might happen to be. So this opens up a whole different kind of world for social data. Here, what we've done is isolated the customer journey from problem recognition to information search, to competitive evaluation, purchase. This is something we did with the Advertising Research Foundation. In fact, Todd Powers is here, who helped to do this study. And this is for the smartphone category. So we were able to look at emotions across the entire purchase journey by isolating through machine learning techniques to isolate those conversations and then overlay it with things like emotion. And we can also do something kind of cool now too, because the question was, all right, well, who are these people anyhow? Do I care about them? Or should I care about them? Well, we can now answer who's expressing these opinions. And the way this works is, imagine all of you on social media. We can pull all the public social conversation data that you've ever had. And we can then apply natural language processing technologies to that to be able to not just say your explicit things in terms of demographics and interests and psychographics, but also the implicit. And so now we can make very highly probable guesses on terms of age, even if it's not expressed. In fact, this has met the threshold of the alcohol companies to be able to get to a certain percentage of folks who you can say with a high level of predictability are over 21, right? And by the way, it's not just what you say, it's also who you're connected to, right? So there's a bunch of signals that kind of go into this as well. Long story short, this now takes social data from being kind of this qualitative, cool little thing that's been sitting on the sidelines for a while to something quantitative and meaningful, and being actually being really kind of mainstreamed into really large organizations that we work with. We've worked with a couple of, some third-party studies are showing this kind of data is now predictive. One is Professor Wendy Moe at the University of Maryland, where we actually took traditional brand trackers, we took the social data, and we said, will these correlate? And if you just took sentiment, by the way, we found that there was 0 to negative correlation with the traditional brand tracker and the sentiment. But when you cleaned this data through those levels of relevancy, cleaned out all the job listings and the advertising and all the other things, and actually brought the level of high level of precision into the data and built a model around it, it got to a 0.80 correlation with the traditional survey-based brand tracker. And that happened across multiple clients, and it's happening across multiple clients that we have now. We also integrate search data sometimes into that analysis as well too. And over here, this data is now going to market mix modeling. We did this with the Word of Mouth Marketing Association. AT&T, Pepsi, a bunch of other companies were involved in it, and showed that word of mouth, including social data, was contributed 13% of sales. And we're actually now start to use social data to be able to do sales prediction, even trial prediction, other things as well. So it's a whole new world. And you can start to pump this stuff into kind of brand guidance systems and other things as well, because the data is now rigorous, customized, precise, and trusted. And so it's really opened up the new doors for kind of social data, and then more broadly for voice of customer data. So long story short, our technologies are available through APIs, through data, through some listing platforms like Brandwatch has a premium platform right now that uses this technique, which is a different solution than has been used elsewhere. And we also have a platform, if you're using a social listening data tool already, you can simply pull that data out, run it through these new techniques, and then be able to model it out, and it sits on top of other listening platforms. So that's all I have in my 20 minutes. But I would simply say, I would simply say one of the critical things here is that really think about the data layer of what you're doing. And we don't care about applications so much anymore. We care about the data layer, and there's a consistency, kind of running through those organizations around all of these types of analytics. So thank you very much.
We have time for a question if anyone has one. In the very far back. Here she comes. There you go.
So taking what you just said as your last statement one step further, thinking about the data layer, can you talk a bit about what the inputs are? Because I'm having trouble visualizing filtering the inputs without Boolean.
Sorry, sorry, just like what the inputs are into the social data?
Mm-hmm. How do you filter those without Boolean?
Yeah, so basically, well, the inputs are, forums, blogs, Twitter, micro, all kind of, social listening platforms. And at the very beginning, you can start with a very basic Boolean. So like instead of trying to do a complex Boolean to isolate the data, you might say X brand, and pull all the data associated with that through the system. Then right out of the box, because these things have been trained so much through years of human coded data, that so the sentiment, emotion, intensity, all that stuff is right out of the box and available. Then the custom classifier stuff that you want, like advocacy, you can either use advocacy classifiers that have been built for other categories and brands and kind of start there and then train it up yourself. Or you can just simply say, I want to build my own custom classifier, and you're going to pull data through, and you're going to look at it, and it's going to say, this represents advocacy, this doesn't, right? And then eventually when you train it enough times, it's going to pick up on those patterns. The really cool thing that you can do, though, is for all those people who have a bunch of human-coded data laying around, that they've had human code data because it's been so bad over the time, what you can do now is you can take that human-coded data and batch upload it into the system, and you'll have a classifier built immediately. And then with this kind of active learning thing, yes, no, you can improve it. I'll tell you guys just a real quick example. Netflix, for example, I can't talk about this one, doesn't care about sentiment. What they care about is watching behavior. And so like binge watching is a big thing, right? And you would think that binge watching is like, hey, I'm binge watching, but a lot of people are saying, hey, I haven't moved off the couch for 3 days, right? You know, there's all kinds of ways to express binge watching that you can't capture in a Boolean query because you couldn't even think of all the permutations of what that would look like. So they actually had humans code 50,000 records of things that look like binge watching. And then they were like, okay, now I have these things. How do I refresh this? How do I change it? Like, because things change all the time. Like, so uploaded into the system. It had 65% agreement with humans, the gold standard, right away. But then through the active, so it gave more examples, like active learning. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And it went to 85% precision within a half an hour. So on precision, on sentiment, emotion, et cetera, out of the box, the custom classifier stuff is really user-based, so that you guys can kind of build it on your own. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, thank you. And unless any other questions, but thank you guys very much.
All right, thank you very much, Rob.